Hello again, and welcome everyone to Data Sales Science and SalesIntel's webinar, How Data Can Drive Relevancy at Scale. With you today, we have myself kind of emceeing and also participating, Ariana Shannon, Marketing Director here at SalesIntel, the best B2B data provider available. And there's a lot more that goes into that, but I'll just kind of leave it at that. And of course, the amazing, the wonderful, the very intelligent Mark Shalinsky PhD, our Chief Optimization Officer from Data Sales Science. I'm so glad that you're here amidst all of the technical issues. I'm glad you made it.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to talk about data, and this is kind of like a day in the life is just managing the chaos. So kind of moving from point A to point B with technological problems. You can't really get too stressed. You just got to say, all right, this issue happened. How do I move on to the next one? And that's essentially the role of ops.
And that is ops. And honestly, that's data as it is too. You're like, all right, this is what I got. Now, what the heck do I do with it? So let's go ahead and jump into the agenda a bit of really focusing in on how data is really important and applies a lot more than just the mere contacts and technographics. And of course, all that's important. But how do you review your data? And where do you decide that it needs to be enriched or enhanced? So like, where do you see that you could improve? How do you actually operationalize that practice? And then how do you leverage your data while you're creating campaigns that your prospects will actually find relevant? And so it kind of all comes full circle. And with that, Mark, I'll pass this over to the first one with you, because I love hearing you talk about this all the time of why enrich your data, why go through the process of it.
So a lot of times it's all about enriching data, and I work with a lot of startups. I've started a lot of startups, and people show up in your website. They give you a first name, they give you a last name, sometimes give you a company name. You always have arguments with the marketing folks. How much stuff should we ask for in the sign up form? And I know the sign up form here asks for name, email, phone number, title, and company name. I usually tell people, if you work with great partners like SalesIntel, then you're able to just ask for a name and a business email, and they can enrich the data for you. So essentially, because if you're just working with a name and email, you have no idea who you're calling. And you want to make sure that when you email, when you send a newsletter, when you communicate, you want to know, you want to be able to resonate with them and have a relevant conversation with them. If you're talking to a CFO of a Fortune 500 company, that is a very different conversation than a CFO who has the exact same title at a small startup that's in your backyard. They have different issues, different pains, and different things that are trying to solve. So, and essentially for the folks that are selling products, you want to know where your product is resonating. So what types of companies are, coming in and looking at your stuff? If you have a web page, there's so much digital analytics out there today. You want to be able to, triangulate to find out, okay, these pages are resonating with really large companies. Oh, these pages are resonating with companies in this country versus that country. If you put something on CCPA, obviously you're going to get a lot of folks who are looking in from California. So California data protection rules. All of a sudden you start seeing people pop in from Europe. You're like, oh, why is that? Then you might get a lead in that, oh yeah, so GDPR, all those rules in Europe are starting to come into play. So you could say, all right, that content is starting to resonate with them. And then you also want to find out, who are these individuals? Like, what are they doing? What are they resonating? What types of people? Is it the marketing folks, the sales folks? Is it the finance people? Because you want to be able to figure out whatever you're doing, like, how is it resonating? Because there's the age-old saying that the C levels talk in Excel, and everybody else talks in PowerPoint. So, if you're showing a lot of great data, you have a lot of content. Like, I've got a ton of content on my website, and it's very interesting to see, what size company and what type of people hit which pages. And, using intent data like 6sense, Lead Magic, and folks like that, you're able to kind of obviate a little bit more of what they're doing. And then if they show up and they they fill out a form, or they interact with your chatbot, and they provide you with that business email, then you can, if you have your system set up with something like with SalesIntel, then that will go back and you'll be able to backtrack and find out exactly what the funnel was that got them to the point of starting to engage, so that you can say, all right, this is the type of stuff that I should be sending out to them. So I take that inbound funnel and now I can point it outbound.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, Mark. And I love you're just synopsizing a lot of it at the same time. And it actually just occurred to me, not everyone is talking at the same level of data that we are. So I'm gonna take it back for half a second.
oops, sorry.
And no, all good, because I love the conversations that we have. But at its base, guys, for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the concept, data enrichment is really just how are you filling in the gaps that you don't know. So Mark, your earlier point of, hey, maybe your form has an email and a name and that's it. And you don't have a lot to go on. And so how do you supplement or bring all of that up to the surface, which is like you have on here, to gain a better understanding of where it's resonating, who it's resonating with, why it's resonating, and then also just how do you get a hold of them and how do you fill in the backdrop. So with that, I'll go ahead and take us to the next one, which you already kind of talked, unless you had something else. Sorry, Mark.
Well, this could have been the first one, is like, what is data enrichment? And I guess this is so I guess the question is, I like going with the why would you do something? And then once we understand why we would do something, to gain a better understanding of who we're talking to, then we said, what do we actually do? So when we enrich the data, I always look at it on two different levels. There's the enriching the company data, so get your ideal customer profile on one side, and then on the other side, you want to get the persona profile. So I've written a bunch of blog articles over the years on these things. You know, the very rudimentary things on a company is like, where are they located? So geolocation, what industry, how much money do they make, how many employees? With Fat Stacks, what was really important to us, we had a field sales enablement guide. So we would want to know how many field sales reps they had. So finding a partner that would be able to find that data for us. So because all of that allows you to slowly segment and thin slice your data. And then you want to look at the personas. And this one gets a little bit tricky because everybody collects titles, but titles at different size companies mean different things. So
Absolutely.
a director at a Fortune 500 company has very different role than a director at a startup. So being able to segment the titles by directors, departments, and role. So where a seniority would obviously be, you know, manager, director, C-level, vice level. Department could be sales, marketing, finance. A role could be security, enablement, or content. So there's sometimes they get a little tricky. And then what you can do with all of these things is you should start segmenting and thin slicing. And what we did at SkySync is we would pretty much just use the personas, and we had our I think it was the monthly email that would go out, and we would have the C and V level, which was very strategic. We'd have the manager E level that would have insights that were very tactical, and then we would have the D level that had one tactical and one strategic insight. And then we would send those out because we thought those would resonate. And then we would watch and see how they would interact. Then after that cooks for a few months, flip it up. All right, what happens if we give more tactical information to the senior level, to the C and V level? Do they engage more or less? And as the hypothesis proved, they engage a little bit less. So that's one way you can use this data. So when you start enriching the data, you start enhancing and appending information to the data, then you could start having these more relevant conversations, because you don't want to be sending your C and V level things of like, how do you do a VLOOKUP in Excel spreadsheet? They particularly don't care. They would probably ask someone to do it without even saying do a VLOOKUP. They wouldn't know what it is. Someone on the manager or below, that is a very tactical thing. So with all that in place, should we sit back and have story time?
With all the exposition, yes.
So,
If I take all of that in and take it in and saying company data, very important, contact data, also very important. But then again, you have to know who you're talking to and what they want. So with that, I'll take you to your next one, your story.
So this is a client we were working with, and it was really interesting because they do a lot of I can't show you their data or tell you exactly who they are, but all of their their entire sales funnel revolved around running webinars. So they would run a webinar and they would pull lists, invite them, and a lot of people would show up. And they would say, yeah, we generate X amount of revenue per webinar. And I said, great. What's your average sale? What's, who are you targeting? And they said, well, we don't really know because, we're in the life science space. We don't really want to ask too many questions. They follow the best practice of just getting people's names and emails and phone numbers. And then they would say, then they would send them 1 or 2 emails afterwards. Then some people would raise their hands and show up. So what we did is we took the data of the last 3 webinars and we that had first name, last name, and a company email, provided them over to SalesIntel and enhanced all of that data. So essentially, just with that very lean information, we're able to get geolocation by country, by state. We got city and street address as well. And we use that by headquarters because we knew we were doing a high sale, so we wanted to make sure we were in the headquarters zone. Employee count, annual revenue, industry, had all that. And then we're able to find their titles. So being able to use SalesIntel and then being able to go to LinkedIn, make sure that things were referenced properly, taking out all those titles, and then parsing the titles, as I mentioned before, by seniority, department, and role, and then putting all that back, and then everybody got kind of profiled. And throw all of that into, I just use Google Studio, which is a great tool, but that's the power of visualization, is you take these spreadsheets, which makes everybody want to stick a fork in their eye, and you visualize them. And a spreadsheet's worth 10,000 lines, but a dashboard is worth a nice picture. I don't know. It's trying to come up with something on the fly. It didn't work.
Like so, a dashboard's worth 1,000 words, and a spreadsheet just makes you go, ugh.
Yeah, could be. Yes. So what we did is we had set it up like 3 or 4 different plates, where the first one was, we said, all right, let's look at the size of companies. And they said they didn't know where they were coming from. And they said, oh yeah, we just have a lot of academic institutions. I said, great. So now we can filter against academic institutions and find out that most of the people who were showing up were from ridiculously large companies. They were these big 10,000 person plus companies. So we said, yeah, academic institutions, when we put them all together, is worth about 60% of your webinar attendees. But if we take them out, 40% are coming. Of the 40% that was left, 90% of those folks were from these very, very large companies. So we said, yeah, your target, like, even though you're just they literally pulled lists from, I have no idea where, friends, families, whatever. They just pulled lists. I said, yeah, but after the academics, it's the scientists at these very large companies who are interested in you, which kind of leads to the next part. I hedge that a little bit. So then we went to the next plate and we said, all right, let's look at the types of people, who are the titles and seniority. And then we discovered that most of these people, they were, well, now that I said they're scientists, I could say that they were scientists, and most of them, it was the 80-20 rule, where 80% of them were scientists and 20% were a director and above. And a director and above at a large company, that's a good target to hit. So what we said is, all right, using the sales vernacular, this is a champion to economic buyer sale. So if we're hitting these people at webinars, we want to make sure that next time we run the webinar, we're really hitting them with messaging that's going to empower these folks to go to their boss and say, yeah, we should work with these people for these reasons. So that helps the relevance of it, knowing that most of the people who are showing up are going to be the champions. And because we were able to enrich and append the data, we can pull that small group of high-level directors and then reach out to them directly with a different message, a different story. So, you want to hit while the iron's hot. So being able to use any sort of sales enablement platform where you're able to put them into a sequence, put them to a cadence, hit them with a lot of calls. So some things like concert, if you're aware, being able to put them in there and put them with relevant messaging. So now we've just gone from having a webinar where all we asked for was the name and email, made sure it's a company email, profile them, made sure during the webinar we hit them with the relevant messaging, And at the end of it said, all right, here's the small group of people we want to target at the end. And this is the message. And then hit them very rapidly at the end with a relevant message, as opposed to something that may or may not hit, and being able to drive up sales. Because at the end of the day, we're all in for-profit. Most of it, I think everybody's in a for-profit company. So we should be for-profit.
I mean, I haven't profiled the list yet, so I don't know. I don't know, Mark. We're
Oh,
gonna find out.
you're gonna ruin the giveaway at the end. So that's a story time. So everybody can get up from their nap and yawn now. So then so now we're just gonna kind of segue into a couple of other little things. Once you have an enhanced and appended list of information, then there's a variety of different things you can start doing with it. So the first one is that I love doing is you thin slice your segment. So, for, let's say you're targeting, going back to that CFO example, I'm a fractional CFO. I work in SaaS companies. I'm going to start targeting and message companies that are like $500,000 to $1 million of revenue that are SaaS in the Midwest. Everybody within that target market will have the exact same, have very similar problems. So it means that you can have similar conversations. So as I'm going down, sending my emails, setting up my landing pages, setting everything that I want to do, I can really hone in on what that message is. And obviously, number two, could have been number one, was once you have that thin slice, then you can go research that target segment. So my favorite action is you go out to old job postings and you say, I'm only looking at job postings for companies that fit this specific profile, that are looking to hire this specific person. And they'll come up with roles and responsibilities. And now I know that when I call them up, someone who's hired into that position, even if it's not the company that had the job ad, because I pulled a whole bunch of it and figure out what is the commonalities, then I can then turn around and message that. And I know that hopefully, if they were hired and that was one of the roles and responsibilities they were hired for, every quarter they're going to be challenged. How did you do a benchmark against this thing we hired you against? So I then could take my product and say, all right, I'm going to come and message them and show them how my product is going to make them look like a rock star for that role and responsibility.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, Mark. And sorry, before you go to the very last one with it, just go ahead and ask you the question, because I know how I would respond to this. But how do you go about finding those thinner slices of the segment? Are you doing that based on personas? Are you doing that on sub verticals, locations? What are things that you've seen work?
I'm doing that on things that I think are relevant for me. So
Okay.
so one of the things we did we did this at, I think Paul DeMarzo at Duo Security kind of showed me. He was the former CFO. He said, you want to break down as small as possible, because once you collected all of the data and it's in as small as possible, it's really easy to bin them back together. So I can collect all the data with like raw employee counts. And then I always have that raw employee count, and SalesIntel is working on the background. It keeps on updating that. Put an asterisk next to that, because you always want to make sure you're using one single database of record. If you're using SalesIntel and then you have some reps that are going to LinkedIn and putting data from LinkedIn, then you're going to having two competing databases. So you want to make sure you have standardized error as opposed to random error, because if you have data from here and then data from here, that's going to be random error. You have no idea what the error is. But if you're always coming from one database, and that database is slightly off, you're at least slightly off everywhere. So going back to it, actually, let's say you have employee counts. So I'll take raw employee counts, then I'll bin the employee counts and say, they're going to go from 1 employee to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 50, 51 to 100, and so on, and say my SMB target is going to be 1 to 500. So I'm just going to double bin. So I have raw employee numbers on one end, small bins, and then a big bin, which is my SMB. So that I'm able to, and then if at a future date, I'm saying, okay, the weird things are happening. If all of a sudden I look at the variance, I look at my average sales price and I see it starting to swing wildly over a quarter, like between one quarter to next, I'm going to start looking into the micro segments, the micro bins, and say, maybe I have to segment it more. But I always say, start lean. If you're doing direct messaging, the smaller the segment, the better. It's like, it's better to have 5 people you can have the right message to, and then you get that relevancy at scale. And then you test it, and then maybe you widen it.
No, absolutely. Because that's the whole point, is how do you stay relevant and how do you reach the people? But again, how do you also do that at scale? Like we all want to grow. We will have targets. We want to hit targets. Like the end of the year is coming. We all have our quotas to hit. But then I love your commentary on the segments, because, and I've actually had this conversation recently with someone around ABM a little bit of, well, how do you make that relevant for them? And if you just start kind of breaking it down into, well, maybe let's look at the, like you commented on the personas earlier, the director at an SMB is going to be very different than a director at the enterprise company. Have you accounted for that? Do you have that in what you know and you're targeting? Yes. Does it require more segments? Yes. Does it require more emails and workflows for you personally to build as the marketer? Yes. But if you can start testing this and exactly double down or pivot, you lose almost nothing other than maybe a little bit of time if you're going to do these smaller campaigns and test it and keep operationalizing it.
Well, so we ran a sequence on a very, very thin slice, and it was quite funny because Wes, who was doing calls for us, he called like 4 people in a row, and they're like, "Are you in my head?" Because I just had that conversation with my CEO. And it was really funny because like we knew that people within a specific segment were having this specific problem, and we thin sliced it. It was really like $500,000 to $1 million of revenue, SaaS companies, Midwest, and with other, with a certain amount of employees, because trying to find that delta between revenue and employee count, and if it hit that green zone, we knew that they were having that problem. So that kind of resonated. So the next really cool thing, this is kind of taking it to the whole next level. And this was, I think SkySync, the leadership there, really helped make this very actionable, is that all of a sudden you want to get your entire go-to-market strategy aligned by the data. So here, you have multiple verticals, and you'll have SMB, mid-market, and enterprise for each one. Each one might have those bins segmented differently. And each vertical, you want to have different ways that you can go to market for them. So I know, you have marketing, you'll have direct and channel, and you'll say, there's a vertical, we never want to market to the SMB, either direct or channel. It's just not worth our while. And, this is essentially what HubSpot did right at the beginning, is they came in and they said, we really want to go after enterprise. So we're going to start marketing to enterprise, and anybody who goes in and shows up on our doorstep who's not enterprise, a lot of those folks, if we're going to pass them off to our digital marketing partners. So they're able to say, all right, based on how we've segmented the data and based on your vertical, we'll determine where you go. It's like, oh, we're not going to, so from where we're going to spend money on marketing, direct or channel, then the next phase would be, all right, if they show up and they're inbound, obviously we're going to talk to them. It's like, and maybe I should have one here that says inbound qualification is just like chatbot only, or email only. But what happened at HubSpot is, I think it's John Marcus III, is he started building out their partner program, and he said, we're just going to train you on HubSpot. You're in this region, and we're just going to feed you leads. If they show up in our funnel, we're like, here you go. We don't want them. You can have them. And it helped them build an entire company. And then it also helps align how your entire, all the marching orders. If someone has a sheet like this in front of them and says, oh, you're in this industry, you're mid-market, you show up at my doorstep, and I'm gonna fast track you over to an AE because that's what the rules of engagement say. And it also helps, with the partnerships. If someone shows up on your doorstep, because if you're any sort of SaaS company, people are showing up on your doorstep every day. They want to partner, they want to resell, they want to be a VAR. And you could say, great, who's your target market? It's SMB. You know what? Sorry, we're not dealing with you. Lead IQ, I love those guys, but they don't want to partner with anybody unless they're targeting enterprise. It's kind of amazing. But it's like you show up at their doorstep and they're like, nope, we're not dealing with you. And it's one of those things that really helps people out because getting focused is key. I think Kenny Van Zandt from SolarWinds, he said the only thing that a company needs to focus on to succeed is the handoff between departments. So being able to work to have the data that helps you understand where the handoffs are will help you grow your company. And you can't do that unless you have good data. So someone shows up in your doorstep, they provide a first name email, company email. The first thing you do is you enhance it. And obviously you can set up the APIs to get that done fairly quickly. Then you could figure out which swim lane are they going into, and then you could start triaging them that way. Your outbound reps know that, anybody who manages any sort of outbound team, you have rules of engagement. It's not, hey guys, make money. It's, hey guys, make money. We only want to target, your best ASP or companies of this size. Like we did that with Duo Security, is that we knew that although we didn't really like law firms or smaller companies, we knew that mid-market law firms, so those ones that had offices all over the place, that had over 100 employees, if we got to the IT manager and they didn't have anything in place, it was a 14-day close and they would not bulk on price. So if a rep looked like they were going to miss quota, like, all right, it's time to pull out the law firm list because we know they're relatively fast. We don't really want you to hunt them, but we want you to make quota. So go after those guys. So that's kind of, hopefully that was clear.
I mean, hey, we're going to open it up to Q&A in a couple or just a minute. If you guys have it, go ahead and start popping in the chat. And honestly, Mark, what we have labeled here is like vertical A, vertical B, vertical C. Perhaps another name for that is just plays. You can break this down to simple as this is a data play. Like you have your sales plays, you have your marketing campaigns. You can have data plays of, okay, which bucket do you fill in? All right, now go down that slide and we'll see what happens. And then we'll like readjust it as we need to in like the simplest terms.
I just looked at these from because we just had different industries. So that's how I kind of said this is industry A, industry B, industry C, because if you look at, let's say, all these companies, everybody segments for-profit, non-for-profit. Sometimes they go for-profit, government, education, and that's it. But it's like, when we were at FatStacks, there was a distinct difference between life science and manufacturing companies. And it was just shocking. It is like, you're not going to say for-profit, education, government. And so now, Big Tin Can is the company that acquired us. That's something similar that they're doing, is being able to look at different market verticals, because the more you segment by industry, the more you're able to resonate that messaging with people. And, you want to be able to have those plays per industry that will resonate with them, because, a marketing manager at a manufacturing company has a very different skill set at a complementary of a marketing manager at a complementary SaaS company, and different tools.
Absolutely.
All right. Is it Q&A time? Is it hot seat time?
I believe it is hot seat time. Yes. All right, guys, go ahead and start filling in the chat with any questions. Could be anything from terminology that we've used to overall concepts, or just, hey, like, Mark, what's your favorite color?
Purple.
There you go. So I'm gonna move this over.
Sorry, I went a little deep. I need to write more and do more things that are a little bit on the lighter, easier to digest side. But I'm kind of the entrepreneur, where I come inside and fix all the things. So today, I'm in Greg's office. I was here earlier today, and I was setting up all their sales operations. So as Greg is making calls and sending emails out, it's like I was setting up all the sequences and chaining sequences. So as he spoke to folks and they're like, yeah, this is interesting, it's like they fall into one of three buckets, being able to build those other buckets. So that's what I do during my daily life, is help people with operations. So I make things, and the three pillars that I help with Oh, we got questions? Yeah.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Of the devil's in the details a lot of the times, and what can make a huge difference is, again, knowing what you have in your system, knowing if that's actually serving what you want, because we all have like the bigger questions, or maybe the questions we get on the day to day of, okay, how do we like 10x our growth? Go look at your data. What's in your system? Is that helping you get to that goal? Is there something you're missing? Is there something you need to add, to where you talk about like building all these sequences and building these all of building all the cadences out? It's going to help you get there, but you have to have an understanding of what is good, what needs help, and is it going to help you actually get there?
So Nate has a question that they're researching folks, and then they're finding all the content information. So the next thing I would say, the first thing I would do is on LinkedIn, you want to find out what their social engagement is. And so I call social engagement, I put people in one of three categories. People that you find on LinkedIn, and it's like, it shows their activity feed for the last 90 days. If there's nothing there, it's like, yeah, there's no reason to even engage with them on LinkedIn, because they're not engaging at all. They might be trolling, but it's really a waste of time. Second ones are, I call them the company likers. They pop in and they just like, they cyberbully that like button on anything the company puts out because they're being a good citizen, corporate citizen. And then there's the people who I call are fully engaged. These are the ones who are writing content, putting comments on, liking other people's stuff. And those are the folks that you try to figure out, all right, how do I triangulate and figure a reason to comment on something they're commenting on, or comment on one of their posts and engage with them on a social metric. The other, and then when you're able to engage with them, just open a conversation. And this is one of the ways that I've been increasing my network, is like, I just have a conversation like, hey, thanks for, if someone connects with me and they don't have a note of why, where it sounds like a bot, I say, hey, what piqued your interest? What about my profile piqued your interest? And if they respond like a human being, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It's like, it looks like you do blah, blah, blah. Love to chat. And then you schedule a 15-minute chat, you learn a little more about them. And then obviously, if you're in direct sales and going after, if you're in direct sales, then, you obviously want to be a little more judicious with your time to only be targeting people who might be a good sales, so that you can kind of go and figure out if they're friendly, because people buy from people. The other one would be, SalesIntel has that intent data. So being able to figure out what are those companies and people looking at, what are the scoops, what are the news articles, what are the people looking at? Because now we can find what that individual, because that individual is probably doing research on something. And what are they doing research on? And
Absolutely.
it could be research that you're directly related to. So if you're like in the sales enablement space and you find out they're looking at dashboards, but you don't do dashboards, but it's kind of in the space, you could say, hey, our company uses dashboards, and these are the pros and cons about it. And now you're having an enlightened conversation on a topic they like, and they're starting to see you as a credible resource.
Pro tip on that one, Mark, if any like intent topics that you specifically know that are helpful, use those in your subject lines. It's exactly what like they're looking for it. They're interested in it. Put it in your subject line. It's going to grab their attention. You're going to be able to get more insight, because it's not just, oh, well, who's interested in this? But then why not use that as like your own keyword in your emails of trying to pique what they're actually looking for. And also just a side note on, my team is researching on LinkedIn and then going into SalesIntel. Nate, forgive me for not knowing if you're a user or not, but if you guys don't have RevDriver for your team, that is literally SalesIntel in a Chrome extension that you can put on LinkedIn, so you can do it all in one place. RevDriver, one word, highly recommend looking it up. Very, very helpful for that. But yeah, Mark, have you ever heard of that, of using the intent topics in the subject lines before?
I've used it before, but usually I engage with them on LinkedIn directly.
Hey, you can use it in your email too. Like you can have it in like the first sentence.
Yeah, and it's part of it is like getting eyeballs in front of it, and you always want to have things nice and short, so that people, because it's that mirroring thing that if I write a long effusive email, they're going to feel that they need to respond in a long effusive email in kind. And people do not have, sometimes don't have the time to respond to a long effusive email in kind. But if I send a short email, they're like, I can respond yep or nope. And then if I send them a text, texts are really casual. So I can respond with an emoji, or I just hit a like, haha, that's pretty funny. So that's another way. It's like just being able to kind of goes off the topic, but the intent data, it's like, I'm on a couple of WhatsApp groups, and it's sometimes people ask me things and then I'll just respond with one word. It's like dashboards. And they say, yup. And I'm like, what about Avis? And they're like, who? And they send a link. And it's like our conversations are like six words, 3 each. And like, that's it. And then they're like, talk. Okay. And then I send the link to my calendar. So it's, being able to get these things.
Awesome. Well, here we've got a couple more questions popping in. We'll go over to Q&A. Are there any good resources you recommend utilizing in order to build an initial ICP, as well as reevaluating if one has been long established, but may need some tuning? So where do you go to find or build out your initial ICP, and then how do you kind of reevaluate your existing one?
So part of it is depending on how, like, are you coming in from a company that's like a startup or established? Like, do you have any sales or anything of the sort? Because that would be kind of where my starting point would be, is like, this is what we had at Duo Security. We had a martini glass funnel. So we had a ton of people coming in the top of the funnel. We just had to figure out, and we just said first name, last name, and just email address. And it took a very big effort for me to get phone numbers because we did not have database resources at that time, to get people to request for phone numbers. So what we did is essentially we started looking at where are these sales coming from, and then we started creating this, a distribution map of where the sales were, and say, okay, these are what our swim lanes could be. So let's start collecting our database, our data. Let's start, testing them. It's like, we really don't want to go after these low SMB, even we call it even mid-market low group. We only want to be targeting enterprise. And we let that cook for a quarter and say, all right, how did that work out for us? And then kind of reevaluate and figure out, do we double down there, or do we pivot to something else? Because it was very interesting, because we had this product. It was a 2-factor authentication product that just worked on your cell phone. So being able to, so it didn't look like it was very enterprisey. And a lot of times when we came to market, a lot of the enterprise would ask if you have an on-prem device. And that was the big holdup. So similar to what happened in Silicon Valley, anybody who saw that, is like when they had the battle of like, should we build the box? Like, we had that discussion internally, and eventually decided, no, we're going to try enterprise without the box. And that was the right decision, not to waste any engineering resources on the box. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, they had use case A, which was a startup, and then a use case B, which is a startup with about 2 or 3 years. So I feel like you did answer it. Maybe they'll chat back and let us know either way. But as far as a tool that it goes with, I can't say that I'm familiar with one, because it really, you basically just need a place that is going to aggregate all of that sales information for you. And then you can dig into, okay, what are my technographics of these companies? What are my firmographics? What's the salesographic data? How long did it take me to close this specific kind of deal? Who had to sign in on the dotted line? Who was my champion? And from once you have that raw data to try to sift through all of it, that's where you can figure out, oh, well, these are the people that buy us pretty consistently. Let's start doing that and start experimenting on the expansion of the funnel.
This is where having a combined marketing automation CRM work. Yeah. This is where having all of that inside one or two systems are well integrated together, because then you can see that life of the lead. The system, essentially, it's Excel. Because what you do is you start exporting the data, and you say, okay, what is our closed won data? And this is what I do all the time. This is kind of the fun part. You say, what's the closed, and it's like, I will give people a minimal data requirement, and then I'll say, this is the least amount that I need, but if the more you have, the better. And it's like, when was this opportunity created? When was this And we could even have, when was the first time we had a conversation with people? And who was that conversation with? Because often the person you start the conversation with and the person who signs the dotted line are different. When did that switch? How long is it? Can you run a cohort analysis on something like this? And it's, pieces of data that you'd be looking at there is you'd obviously need, every time someone was added to the opportunity, make sure there's a history of what stage were they added. And you want to follow Mark Roberge's rules that stages should be buyer-centric, not seller-centric, because the buyers are the ones that are moving through, and as opposed to you trying to wedge them through the funnel. Because if you have when they started, you can get the lead, because the next metric that you want to collect is the LTV, the lifetime value of that lead. And you want to figure out from the day they close to the day they churn or go away, how long does that typically take? In SaaS years, that's typically measured in 3 to 5 years. You also want to figure out what CAC is, your customer acquisition cost. And that's where your marketing, you figure out what is the marketing spend to get that person, get that company into the funnel, and then get to the finish line. And if you're just dealing with the CRM data, you're not going to get that. So we use this fantastic tool called SharpSpring. It's a HubSpot Lite platform. And it's built for smaller organizations, but it's fully integrated, that it allows us to see every time the full engagement, and it's like at a click I can see which pages they've gone to, what they've gone to, and then I can start setting up all the marketing automation. So if there's any smaller companies that are looking for automation, I'm happy to show some of the tools that I use. Like I'm dog fooding, if you've ever looked at the 10-bound placard that's got like 100,000 different sales enablement tools, I've gone through 5,000 of them so far. So my goal is to figure out what's the very simple use case for each one, because they're all valuable in certain use cases. And the biggest problem that people have is they'll go off and they'll say, oh, I've got a company, I've got to get Salesforce because that's the big boy tool and eventually we'll grow into it. Well, what's going to happen is you get Salesforce and it's the big boy tool, but you don't have anybody managing it. And then it becomes a big trash can. And then when you're ready to actually use Salesforce, now you're in this monster problem of trying to figure out all the neuroses of the people who set it up originally. Whereas if you can go back to, if you start with something smaller, something leaner, something, Close.io, Pipedrive, even SharpSpring, learn how to use it, figure it out, it works for you. And then when you're ready to graduate, you say, great, we're going to do an export. It's going to be kind of a pain to do the export, but it's very simple, very rudimentary. And now I know what I'm looking for. I do that clean and then I push it out. And, doing a database clean every 2 to 3 years is probably healthy. And if you've got an ops person, just make sure it's part of their workflow that, people are going to clean it up. And I think Lars Nilsson used to have the bad boy data dashboard. He may have used more colorful terms, but essentially sales reps would put their data in. And if their data was missing key bits of data, they would be on this list, and everybody would see who was on that list because they were directing to they were what's it called again? They were not helping the company out because they were putting in bad data. Anyway, sorry, I segued a little long there. It was like a super criminal.
What is super infomercial? Got a lot of information.
No, super criminal.
Good. Gotcha. Okay, so we've got another question in here, which from Gary. It all sounds logical. However, the most difficult thing is to get people on the phone in the first place. Definitely hear that one. Even when we know what it is that they want and you have the perfect solution, people are still not responding. The information we get is from their webinars, our partners' webinars, etc. They say from questionnaires their interests, but they still don't bite.
All right. Well, I'll do a couple of things. So number one, it feels like it was lead up, like SalesIntel has human verified leads. I cannot tell you how good human verified leads are, because back in the good old days, I knew when Nate and I were cranking on phones at Fat Stacks, we're like 107 raw dials to get a decent conversation. I'm down to like 43 calls to get a booked demo. Like that's I won't even, like, I'm having every 5 dials, we're having a conversation. So getting those human verified leads, using cell phone numbers is key. And then when your folks are competent, then you want to go agent assisted. Because if you get human verified leads, cell phone numbers, and then you use agent assisted, something like Concert, like it's like the biggest problem you're going to have is like, how am I sure my reps are giving good phone? And there's a couple of, agent assistant dialers out there, and that really helps them. So the question is, if you're not reaching folks, and then understand that phone is just one of 5 different modalities to reach someone. So let's see if I remember them all. So there's email, there's phone, there's social, there's referral, and then there's direct, like bumping into someone now that we're actually going outside and speaking to people. So just use phone, that's a 20% hit rate. And then you also want to layer on ABM. So when we wanted to go and attack big accounts, we would say, we're going to hit 5 people at this big account at different levels, and we're going to hit them 5 different ways, and we're going to hit them multiple times on each of these ways. Eventually, we're getting to someone somehow. And, that's the 4-letter work part of, that's the 4-letter word work of the sales job, is just getting your foot in the door. That's why they want, use the baseball analogy. If you're hitting 300 in sales, you're the rock star.
No, absolutely. And honestly, a lot of it, because when you're trying to get that initial outreach, it depends on who you're talking to. We all have multiple things that we're trying to solve for, multiple goals that we're trying to achieve. It's all going back up into one. But just because someone reaches out to me and says, "Hey, Ariana, I saw, like, we were doing a drive-by in the neighborhood and we saw that your gutter is it's off your house. Like, we wanted to be off their house." I'm like, okay, yes, I recognize, like, you see, like, we have an understanding that this is a thing for me. However, what you guys don't realize is, like, there was a fire in my kitchen that you can't see, and I am trying to deal with this first. So in addition to, like, the multi-channel outreach, Mark, that you're talking about, and all those other elements, is sometimes the intent is there and you want to reach them, but there's something else, either it's internal or something else that is distracting them. It doesn't mean that it's a bad signal necessarily. You kind of have to keep at it. I know, at least for me, when people have tried to get in contact with me, I'm like, yes, my gutter is an issue, but I'm dealing with this fire in the kitchen. I'll get back to that when I have a second.
And hit them with the text. So
yeah,
hit the cell numbers.
Hit me up with the text.
So yeah, I think Outplay does SMS on there. So it's interesting. Like, Gavin Titch has some good ideas on lead drop-in voicemails. The folks from Connect Science, or Contact Science, they mentioned they have this. They call it their end of sequence of voicemail, as opposed to, like, "Hey, I'm breaking up with you." They tell them, I think it's something to the effect of, "Hey, you probably seen my emails and seen my voicemails. I've been trying to reach out to you, but it seems like now is not the right time. If I'm wrong, reach back out to me, but I'll try you again in a couple of months." Boom, hit them in the recycle. In a couple of months, they'll go back in the sequence. And they say that's got a pretty good response rate, because, you say, "Hey, I'm letting go for now, but I still think you're of value to me," and then come back. Like, there's different tactics for doing things. And it's essentially, it's got to keep pushing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's all the questions we have. I'm responding back to someone in the chat real quick. And then Soren asked, what was that? Was it shark spring or sharp spring?
Sharp spring, as in pointy.
Sharp spring. Awesome. We'll have to get that one out to them. Okay, well, sounds great. I'll go ahead and pop this over here. And I forgot to update my information.
Hey, Raj.
Silly. Yeah, no, I'm just
Promotion.
gonna I got promoted head of growth in like 5 seconds. No, so my name is Ariana Shannon at SalesIntel.io. You guys got all of the Zoom elements from me. That is my email. You guys can either, like, reach me there or hit me up on LinkedIn. Mark, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for everyone that's hung on with us this long. We hope that you guys have an amazing rest of the day.